Good morning, Saints. It's Pastor Jonathan at Robertsdale UMC with today's Daily Devo on this Thursday, October 22nd. And as I was continuing in my devotional reading of the one-year Bible this morning, I went from 1 Timothy to 2 Timothy. So yesterday I shared out of 1 Timothy. Today I'm going to share out of 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, so just a few verses. Paul's writing to Timothy, his young pastor that he's discipled and raised up, and he says, I remember your genuine faith, for you share the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I know that same faith continues strong in you. This is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift God gave you when I laid my hands on you. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Those are great verses, especially that last verse. That's been a memory verse of mine for quite some time, and one that I've been reminded of often, especially as a pastor in this letter written to a pastor. But this morning, I especially keyed in on the fact that Paul is writing to Timothy, and he reminds him of where his faith came from. That Timothy has a faith that started with his grandmother Lois, was passed on through his mother Eunice, and now lives in Timothy. And there we go. All right. Don't know if Facebook will smooth that out, but we just had to disconnect and reconnect, but here we are. Thank you. So Paul is acknowledging that this is a generational faith. And I think it's easy in our experience of God to sometimes think that our faith is all about God and us. And maybe that if we're faithful, we'll get to the end of our life and people will say, they were such a strong person of faith. Maybe we'll be a model for someone. Maybe people will admire us, even look up to our faith, maybe even seek to emulate our faith, which is a positive thing. But there's also this call to take it a step further and to actively and intentionally develop the faith that is in us in someone else. Paul writes to Timothy because he is doing that. Timothy is a mentee of Paul. Paul's his mentor. But Paul is not only Timothy's mentor. Timothy's own grandmother poured into Timothy's mother, who poured into Timothy. So faith is something that's meant to be passed on. I want to ask you in this season, and maybe some of you are feeling very disconnected, and that's why we do these daily devos. It's one way that we can connect in an alternative fashion during a season where connecting in person has been so much more challenging and has come with all kinds of restrictions and changes. But we are insisting on keeping spiritual lines open. We are insisting on finding ways to still be the gathered community of faith and to invest in one another as saints of God, brothers and sisters in Christ. So here's my question for you today. By whatever means are available to you, maybe you're someone who is particularly vulnerable. Maybe your doctors have even told you you need to be staying at home during this time and being very careful. Maybe you've changed your rhythms of where you go and who you interact with. But is there some way, especially in this age of technology, even if all you have is a telephone, to invest in someone to carry your faith on? Because here's the thing about Christian faith. It is designed to be continued. Our faith is always to be continued. You and I are disciples of Jesus because over the course of a couple thousand years, Jesus poured into men and women who poured into men and women, who poured into men and women, eventually trickling all the way down to you and me. And someone is pouring into us. And I want to personally thank you for this opportunity you are giving me to be part of that in your life, to be part of God's pouring into you, for me to be able to be a person who has the honor and privilege of speaking into your life and strengthening your faith and encouraging you as you walk with the Lord. So who is that for you? Who is that person? Do you have a Paul that you can give God thanks for who has poured into you? Maybe it's even a family member. Maybe it is, like Timothy, a grandmother or a mother or some other relative. Or do you have any spiritual mentors like Paul that you can give thanks for? And then who is your Timothy? And this is the big challenge for today. Who is the person or who are the people that you can identify that God has placed in your life to continue your faith through them, to encourage them. And it wasn't that Timothy was completely reliant on Paul's faith. Timothy had his own faith at this point, right? He had his own calling. In fact, Timothy's calling was different than Paul's. Paul was an apostle. Paul was a church planter. He was an evangelist. He traveled all over the place. Timothy was a local pastor. He was stationed in a place to pastor and shepherd the local church, God's people. But Paul poured into him, and Paul used Paul's faith to strengthen and sharpen Timothy's faith. Paul had been steps along in the journey in ways that Timothy could benefit from. So that just stuck out to me today, and it made me think about and be grateful for all of the Pauls and all of the Loises and all of the Eunices in my life. And it also challenges me to think about who are the Timothys in my life. So I would invite and challenge you to ask the same questions as you take your steps of faith with God today. This is Pastor Jonathan with Robertsdale UMC. It's great to be with you on this daily Devo. It was great to be with you last night for Bible study as we looked at Psalms 126 and 127 and talked about joy and work. And this Sunday, I look forward to seeing you either in person at 8:30 or 10, or online at our Facebook page and our website at 10 a.m. for Worship Live. It will be more of a stripped down, acoustic, unplugged kind of worship service. We'll have a piano player and we'll sing hymns and we'll still preach a sermon. But our facilities are under construction. I'm just grateful that we can meet in the sanctuary. So we won't have our usual microphones and sound equipment, but we will still have worship. And I thank God for that. And I look forward to seeing you there. Blessings on the rest of your week. Grace and peace.